Well, from a Ricardo-AEA perspective, and I think from a CIWM perspective, we've got to put best practice, innovative thinking and evidence in the public domain. If some of those authorities that haven't made the full cuts already can see some of the things that may have worked in a place that looks a bit similar, then maybe we could save them a whole heap of pain trying something and it failing. So we've got to make it visible, and that's webinars, articles and general conversations at future CIWM meetings and other networks.
It's really good to get the good practice out there so that those local authorities that have still got savings to make, still got changes to make, can see what others have done and learn from it. I think the positivity of the report is good. It shows that local authorities are rising to the challenge as well as facing the hard choices. And for me, finally, it's about making some dialogue beginning. So I've mentioned in the talk I gave today about funding and communications. Let's start having a dialogue across the wider industry, and I hope this report is the catalyst for it.
One, if you cut your communications budget because you think your recycling's where it needs to be, and it goes backwards because of the new people coming into the borough, because habits die, then what you end up doing is then spending money to catch up. You're not actually moving forward. Number two, you may put off a longer term procurement decision. So you may say, well, we're not going to go for that energy from waste plant because budgets are tight. We'll have an interim solution for the next 4 or 5 years. By the time you come to market, the world may have changed. You may end up getting a much worse deal because the market gets saturated, for example. And the third one for me is trying to make political cycles work. So a politician may decide, I won't cut a service this year because I need to get re-elected. And then in year one of the re-election, they then have to cut 2 services because they've got double the cuts to make because they put off the obvious. That to me is just poor decision making.
What happens is the problem comes back to you in the longer term, bigger and more difficult to solve. So it's a bit like buildings. People tend to cut the ongoing repairs, what they call the preventative maintenance, and actually that stores up problems further down the line, and it's much more costly to do. And I think one of the worries I've got personally is about waste strategy. I think that's the sort of posts that are going at the moment. So the strategy won't be there in 5 or 6 years' time, and that could be a big problem for local authorities.
I think communications budgets have been the fluctuating theme in local government for the 20 years that I've been involved, and probably longer for Lee. What I've found is that it's one of the easy things to cut because it's 100 grand and it's not allocated to anything specific. It might be an advert, it might be a newspaper, it might be door knocking, we don't know. And the evidence around the value of that comms is not thorough. There's good anecdotes out there, and RAP have some, that suggests the value of communications in maintaining and growing recycling rates. But it's still easier to cut than saying renegotiate your contract, because that's got pain and you're not in control of the budget. So I think it's the easy thing for politicians, but it's probably the one thing an officer would want to protect given the choice.
It's very, very difficult to quantify. So if someone comes to you and says, well, what's the value of this £100,000 communication budget? You can tell them, but you can't prove it to them. And that's the difficulty. And again, when it is cut, the way it drops off is very slow, so it's not immediately noticeable. So again, you can't immediately go, we've cut the communication budget, that's happened, we need to put it back. It's just really, really difficult, but we know within the industry, if it goes, the recycling rates will start to go down, service satisfaction will go down. As Adam's pointed out, what we need to do is try and find metrics that can help us measure that, so we've got the evidence base for the people who hold the budgets to say this is why we need to keep it.